The mattress sank deeper, inching toward my legs. The air felt thick, stifling, and the strange, heavy presence was so close now I could almost feel its breath, warm and wrong, brushing over my feet through the blanket. I squeezed my eyes shut, every nerve on fire, waiting for anything to happen. Then, as if sensing my desperation, the weight paused, lingering near my knees. And in that moment of silence, I heard it, a whisper, right above me, so close that I felt its breath against my ear. The voice was soft, taunting, and far too intimate. "Do you remember me?" My mind raced, digging through the corners of my memory, searching for anything, any fragment that could make sense of this. But there was nothing, only a creeping, nauseating feeling of dread that told me I should remember, that I'd seen this thing, whatever it was, before. But when? How? As I lay there, the weight began to crawl up my body again, gliding over my legs, pressing onto my stomach. I felt trapped, pinned by an invisible force that seemed to grow heavier the closer it got to my chest. I struggled to keep my breathing steady, to stay calm, but each shallow breath seemed to feed whatever was looming over me, pulling it closer. My phone buzzed again. I didn't dare look. The weight shifted to my chest, and I could barely breathe. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, but I stayed still, rigid, hoping that maybe if I played dead, it would lose interest. But then a hand, cold, with fingers too long, too sharp, brushed lightly over my throat, and the voice returned, softer now, coaxing, almost playful. "Do you want to remember?" The hand tightened around my throat, not hard enough to choke me, but enough to keep me still. I couldn't move, couldn't even swallow. I could feel the icy grip of its fingers, the sharp points pressing into my skin as if daring me to resist. My phone buzzed again, the sound like a lifeline, and for a second, the pressure on my throat eased. I managed to force my eyes open, just enough to see the glow of the screen. It was another message from that nameless number. My stomach dropped as I read the words. Look, every instinct screamed at me not to, but as if compelled by something outside myself, I turned my head slowly toward the dark corner of the room. And that's when I saw it, a shadow impossibly tall, filling the space between the wall and my bed. It was all wrong. A twisted silhouette with limbs that stretched too far, bent at unnatural angles. Its head cocked to one side, eyes gleaming with a faint, otherworldly light. It had no features, no face, just a dark, yawning void that seemed to pulse with a hunger that felt ancient, predatory. It didn't move. It just watched. The hand on my throat tightened again, and I felt its nails pressing into my skin, cold and biting. My eyes darted around, looking for any escape, but there was nowhere to go. The shadow creature seemed to swell, expanding as if feeding off my fear, filling the room with its oppressive presence. And then, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from every corner of the room at once, it whispered, "Now you remember." Images flooded my mind, a place I'd buried deep, too deep to recall until now. I was a child, no more than 4 or 5, alone in a dark room. There was a closet, slightly ajar, shadows spilling out like smoke. I remembered crawling out of bed, curious, reaching for the door, and seeing those same eyes, watching me from the darkness. I felt the weight lift off my chest as the shadow leaned closer, its breath cold against my face. And just before everything went black, I heard that same, taunting whisper echo through my mind. "I told you I'd come back."
When I came to, I was sprawled on the floor beside my bed, drenched in sweat, my hands trembling as I tried to sit up. The room was empty now, no shadow, no humming, just a faint gray light of dawn creeping in through the blinds. I could barely remember how I'd ended up on the floor, my last memories slipping away like smoke, but the ache in my throat was real, a dull, throbbing pain that made swallowing hurt. When I reached up to touch my neck, my fingers brushed over something thin and rough, scratches, for parallel lines, faint but unmistakable, trailing down my skin, the kind of marks that could only have been left by fingers. I stumbled to the bathroom, hands still shaking, and flicked on the light. The scratches stood out, an ugly red against my pale skin, each line sharp and angry. My reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed and exhausted, like I hadn't slept in days. And that's when I noticed something else. In the mirror, just behind me, the bedroom door stood ajar, though I was certain I'd left it closed before I'd fallen asleep. My pulse quickened as I stared at it, half expecting to see that twisted shadow lurking in the gap. But there was nothing, just the empty, silent hallway beyond. I turned back to the sink, splashing cold water on my face, trying to ground myself. It's over, I told myself, over and over, trying to convince myself that whatever I'd seen, whatever had happened, was done. A dream, a hallucination, anything but real. But as I wiped my face dry, I heard my phone buzz from the bedroom, vibrating insistently against the wooden floor. I froze, my heart lurching, a sick feeling churning in my gut. The last time I'd checked my phone, those messages, I hesitated before going back into the room, half dreading what I'd find on the screen. When I finally picked it up, there was a new message waiting from that same blank number. It was a single word: tonight. My stomach dropped. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. The air forced from my lungs. I deleted the message, fingers shaking, but even as I did, I knew that wouldn't make it go away, because this thing, whatever it was, wasn't done with me. It was coming back. I spent the day in a fog, jumping at every shadow, feeling eyes on me in every room. By nightfall, I was exhausted, but the thought of sleep filled me with dread. The light in my room stayed on as I sat on the edge of my bed, my gaze fixed on the door, waiting, hoping that somehow, if I stayed awake, it wouldn't come back. But midnight passed, and then 1 a.m., and my exhaustion grew heavier, pulling me down until my head nodded, my vision blurred. I fought it, struggling to keep my eyes open, but sleep came anyway, dragging me under. I don't know how long I was out before the cold woke me. It seeped into my bones, freezing and unnatural, sending a violent shiver down my spine. My eyes snapped open, and I was met with darkness. The light was off. I didn't remember turning it off.
Then I heard a soft, familiar scraping sound from the foot of my bed. I held my breath, lying perfectly still, hoping it would just stop, hoping it would go away. But the scratching grew louder, more insistent, inching closer until I could feel it, like claws raking over my sheets. And then, in the dark, I heard that whisper, so close, it felt like it was inside my head. "Are you alone?" The question hung in the air, sinister and mocking. And this time, I couldn't ignore it. This time, it demanded an answer.